Hi, welcome to Film Fiend. My name is Seb, and today I'm going to be doing a spoiler review of the Odyssey. So, as I said, this is going to be a spoiler review. I will be unpacking some of the themes and going into specifics, so that's your spoiler warning. If you haven't seen the film, then do not continue, but you can watch my spoiler free review if you're interested. So after sitting and thinking about this film more, mostly because I just couldn't get it out of my head because it's so incredible and filled with loads of striking imagery and unforgettable moments, I started to put together what it all means, what the overarching themes are, and the more I thought about it, the more I've come to realize just how clever and how thematically rich it is. Obviously, this is just my interpretation of the themes, and also I haven't read the Odyssey, so I don't know how much of these themes are prevalent in the original text, but I'm discussing the film and the themes in the story that Nolan is telling in this film. So, the main law or principle that underpins the philosophy of the ancient world of this film is called Zeus's law. It's essentially Nolan's spin on the Christian golden rule of do to others what you would have them do to you. And it's the core principle in their philosophy. It's the rule that underpins their entire theology. And as Nolan pointed out in an interview, quote, for that world, it's very clearly basic survival. You leave the house for more than a couple of days, you are by definition throwing yourself at the mercy of strangers. It's the only way that society can function. That became very important to the film, and as soon as you start drilling down on it, you realize nothing's changed. That's everything in terms of holding civilization together or even defining civilization. End quote. So, Zeus's law, a rule that binds us all together and allows a society to function cohesively, is the central theme in this film. Now, I'm not a theologian, but obviously modern religions must derive so much from the Greek gods and the ancient myths that came out of that culture. Those stories hold so many important psychological truths, and the Greeks were a fascinating and extremely philosophically sophisticated people. So to be able to distill so much of that ancient wisdom into a story that can be understood and related to by all is such an immeasurably impressive feat. Even though Zeus's law doesn't appear in the original text, there is a concept known as xenia. Xenia essentially laid out the rules of hospitality for travelers and their hosts. Hosts were expected to treat guests well, and guests were expected to honor their hosts. And this is why Penelope and Telemachus could not dismiss the suitors from their home, as it would have incurred the wrath of the gods. What Nolan does with Zeus's law is conflate Xenia and the Golden Rule into one all-encompassing rule of law. It's a way of distilling these important principles into one solidified rule that is palatable to modern audiences. And it's such a clever idea. Nolan's approach and exploration of these themes in this film has got to be his most sophisticated work to date. It's absolutely brilliant. And this idea of Zeus's law is without a doubt the most universal and fundamental core value that has unified civilization since the time period displayed in this film to the time period it was made in. I'm sure this idea has taken many forms over the centuries in many different theologies, but for Nolan to distill and integrate it into this ancient seminal text in an edifying way is actually genius and deserves commendation. The central theme in this story is about how losing basic humanity will be the undoing of civilization. And Odysseus' mental state is reflective of his failure to acknowledge the part he played in violating Zeus's law. He's lost in his cognitive dissonance, a state of mind that was catalyzed by his involvement with the act that violated this sacred law. The Trojan horse was Odysseus' idea. It's a trick that overtly breached Zeus's law, and his journey, in part, is about him coming to terms with this and reconciling with the fact that he is guilty of sacrilege. Through the overtly defiant act of war, trickery, and genocide, he and the Greek army topple the first domino that leads to a breakdown in civilization. And this slow reconciliation is an important part of his character arc. Zendaya's character Athena represents his guilt for his participation with this destructive act. He is essentially haunted by her throughout the film. He is culpable and he knows it, if only subconsciously. During the sacking of Troy, Odysseus is witness to a soldier chopping off the head of the statue of Athena, and whilst this is happening, they simultaneously decapitate a young woman, played by Zendaya. Odysseus now forever associates the desecration of the statue with the murder of an innocent woman, and this is why Athena appears to him in the form of that woman. The act of desecrating the statue of Athena is symbolic of the Greeks' act of defiance against the gods, but most importantly, them going against the principle of Zeus's law, an act which will incur the gods' wrath, but in this story more so figuratively than literally. Zeus's law is the cornerstone of a cohesive society that enables people to exist harmoniously and affords them the right to live without fear of being brutalized by others. Robert Pattinson's character Antinous, along with the other suitors, represent what can transpire in the absence of the enforcement of those values, and their behavior is indicative of a gradual but exponential eroding of civility. The tagline for this film is "Defy the Gods," but for me this isn't to be interpreted as a rhetorical rebellious statement, but rather an open-ended question with a ... at the end, as in defy the gods and you'll see what happens. This theme is actually not too dissimilar to Nolan's previous work on Oppenheimer. The "I have become death, destroyer of worlds" line is invoked by Odysseus' defiance of the gods and the subsequent incurring of their wrath. But even though this plays out mythologically with literal hardships befalling him and his men, it's also metaphorical and allegorical with the degrading of civility and the fall of the fundamental components that undergird a stable civilization. Due to his active participation with this act of defiance against the gods, Odysseus is basically experiencing PTSD from his time at war, and his guilt consumes him so much that he's willing to forget everything if it means forgetting what he did at Troy. When Odysseus is stranded with Calypso, Nolan goes to a place akin to his work on Inception with the memory loss and time jump stuff. Those scenes in retrospect are some of the most important moments thematically, as Odysseus is literally and figuratively lost. He's lost himself and his purpose and his mind. He, possibly subconsciously, chooses this path in order to forget about the part he played in collapsing the values that uphold civilization. He becomes a literal lotus eater, and this is where that term originates from. The plant itself is a mythological narcotic. Anyone who eats it falls into a blissful, apathetic state of amnesia. They forget their homes, their loved ones, and their duties, and they care only to stay in a state of dreamy idleness. Calypso herself represents temptation and the allure of immortality, and the name Calypso derives from the Greek word kalypto, which means she who conceals. She embodies a timeless, isolated paradise where one could lose their identity and forget their history. This is appealing to Odysseus because of his all-consuming guilt, but he's coerced further into this apathetic mindset by Calypso, and he ends up spending 7 years lost in this state. This kind of stuff was perfect for Nolan to tackle. It's totally in his bailiwick, and is already in his wheelhouse from his previous work on Inception, Interstellar, and Memento. And that scene where Odysseus realizes that he's been lost to himself for 7 years is really shocking and very Inception coded. For the sake of balance here, I will point out that Calypso has basically no characterization. She's just Charlize Theron. So that is a flaw in the writing. Nolan didn't write the character to be anything more than a generic version of Calypso, and Theron's performance is pretty bland, to be honest. But he's juggling so much in this film that it's understandable that some of the characters ended up not as fleshed out as they maybe should have been. But for me, these little flaws are totally forgivable in the grand scheme of things, and this film is such a transportive and immersive experience that none of these flaws ever took me out of it. The thematic complexity for me is the most impressive part of the storytelling in this film. The themes Nolan explores are just so fundamental and essential, not just to the story, but to humanity, and they will be universally significant and important in perpetuity. But there's also so much in this film to be admired purely on a technical level and in terms of how a film affects you viscerally. The scene with the Cyclops is really impressive. It plays out like a horror sequence, and thanks to the practical effects, the Cyclops is terrifying. It has such weight to it, it feels real, and Nolan's commitment to bring it to life using practical effects is what gives it its tactility. They used puppetry and perspective tricks to ground it in realism, and it pays off so well. The sound design in that scene is remarkable as well. When the Cyclops screams, the sound is deafening, and those cacophonous sounds seem to become integrated into the score, making for an overwhelming and unbearable assault on the eardrums. It truly sounds like you're hearing the screeches of an otherworldly creature. Also, the scene with Samantha Morton as Circe is extremely jarring and shocking. That sequence around the table when she's turning the men into pigs is amazing. The way it's shot is everything. The way they crafted that scene using only practical effects for the transformations is incredible. It's so visceral, and the realistic tactility of the practical effects bolsters how harrowing it is. The way she molds their faces with her hands whilst her demeanor is so calm and focused, like it's a perfunctory act, is so horrifying, and it's a very disturbing sequence. In addition, it's so tense and suspenseful when Odysseus turns up and you're willing him to realize what's happening and for him to not eat the food. And when she transforms the men back, she's saying, return to your disguises, as if their human form is their guise and pigs is who they truly are. It's such a distressing and impactful scene that really took me by surprise, and Morton's performance is incredible. Another scene I loved is when Telemachus realizes that this beggar he's with is actually his father. It's a really moving moment. I love in films where there's a character who's disguised their identity, and we as the audience know the truth of who they are, but we want the other characters to discover who it is. But scenes like that are typically a big, shocking, bombastic moment. But here it's more of a quiet, intimate moment, and I love that. After witnessing Odysseus' long, arduous, and grueling return journey, to see him meet his son again, and for Telemachus to meet his father properly for the first time, is such a deeply emotionally charged moment, but it's presented in this intimate way. It's not a grand, melodramatic moment. It hits in a way that's much more private. It's a moment that's just for father and son. This revelation is catalyzed by Odysseus' loyal, long-suffering dog passing away as soon as he feels his master's touch again. It's also subtle and gentle, but beautiful and tragically poetic, and kind of quietly devastating. I really like the choice Nolan made to have it be this affectionate moment between them. It's such a great scene. But then we get the sequence that we've been building up to for basically the entire film, and that finale is so satisfying. You're really wanting Odysseus to just get in there and slaughter all of those suitors, especially that smarmy Antinous. How Odysseus reveals that it's him by successfully stringing the bow and firing it through the axes is so badass, and I love how Nolan didn't hold back with the whole revenge aspect of it all. As soon as his identity is revealed, Odysseus just starts fucking them up, and that scene is relentless and kinetic as he begins to dispatch them left and right in a last-ditch effort to reclaim his rightful place. But it's not like he's just this unrealistically invincible warrior. He's taking damage as well. And it's one of those fight scenes where it feels so visceral and impactful as you're experiencing this cathartic fight vicariously through him. Telemachus is there as well on the periphery, aiding his father, and he gets his heroic moment. But because I hadn't read the Odyssey, I didn't know what the outcome was going to be, and Nolan does his little trick of having it seem like Odysseus is not going to survive, using the editing to sow doubt into the audience's mind, getting to have his cake and eat it too by teasing us with Odysseus' death, before subsequently revealing that he in fact survives. And it's just so relieving and satisfying. Him and Penelope get their happy ending, and Telemachus gets his coming of age arc. It's such a great ending movement. Also, obviously, Penelope realizes that Odysseus and his men are actually the notorious people from the sea who have violated Zeus's law. And through his slaughter of the suitors, Odysseus breaks Zeus's law one last time, but does so in order to wipe the slate clean so that a new age of civility can come forth in his wake. And as they sail away, Odysseus makes it clear that now through Telemachus' rule that a new civilization will rise. It's a moment of acknowledgement of what he's done, but with an acceptance of it. He's exonerated himself from his guilt and has passed the torch to his son. It's a passing down of wisdom to the next generation so that they may do better and not repeat the literal sins of the father. It ends on a note of optimism and of hope for the future of civilization. It's a perfect ending to a perfect story. This film is so thematically rich, and after thinking on it for longer whilst writing this script, I actually think it's genius. Obviously, the core of this genius is in the original text, but for Nolan to be able to translate these themes and to write and present the story in such a clever but palatable way is absolutely amazing. This story's relevance has stood the test of time, and it's as important and significant today as it was 3,000 years ago. Obviously, this isn't an absolutely perfect film. It's not a total slam dunk. There's little flaws here and there, but they don't really matter in the broader context of what Nolan and his team have achieved with this film. I'm now thinking that this is Nolan's best work to date. He may as well stop making films now because he's never going to be able to top this. This is a seminal story and a seminal film. So that was my spoiler review of the Odyssey. Thanks so much for watching. And if you like this video, then leave me a like. I'd really appreciate it, and it will help the channel. And consider subscribing and hitting the notification bell. Obviously, I'm still a new channel, so any engagement would be really appreciated. But regardless, thanks so much for watching, and hopefully I'll see you in the next one.